Right, so I guess the obvious place to start would be a little bit of background. You've arrived at KO, which we'll discuss in a minute, but before that, tell us how the path, the journey to arriving there.
Well, it's a pity that we're having this conversation. Despite this distinctly retained American accent, I've now been in Europe 30 years. Before that, I spent and started my career in my actual hometown of Columbus, Ohio, and then worked my way to New York. And this song says, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And after about a half a decade in New York, I had the opportunity in 1994 to move to London. I've always been in the telecoms or high tech space. Pivoted to software for a little while, and then got into the data center business about a decade and a half ago. Really honed my craft at interaction before it was bought by Digital Realty. So was able to work with the late great David Ruberg in terms of just understanding customer segments and how important it is to follow the data and where the data flows, because that's usually insight to an awful lot of things in terms of where technology is going and how to service customers in that respect. So yeah, I just joined Kao Data at the beginning of this year, but it's been part of a decades long career in the high tech space.
And in terms of the journey of KO Data, what was it that attracted? I mean, you may have been headhunted, or I don't know how the process worked, but what was it that attracted you, if you like, to the organization from previous roles you've had elsewhere?
Yeah, I was tapped on the shoulder by an executive search firm, but they were pushing somewhat against an open door because I consciously made a decision to go to Macquarie Asset Management for a while to be able to sit on a board, to be able to be on the remuneration committee, the audit committee, the health and safety committee, but also advising a company on how to scale. It was an organization, Vertus, that was only in one country, and it was really helpful to be able to apply my decade plus knowledge of the data center industry to help them get onto the continent. And I realized at that I had a little bit of an epiphany that said, hey, wait, instead of advising, I actually really enjoy leading and building businesses. And so Kao Data, although it had been around for a decade, was looking for that leadership to take it to the next level, both in terms of magnitude, i.e., instead of it being tens of megawatts, it's more hundreds of megawatts, but also a geographic journey to replicate its success in Harlow as its roots, but in other markets. But what was really attractive to me, about the company is the culture. It's punching well above its weight in the AI space. So this is not something that was the latest fad. This is something that it had been participatory in setting the standard for literally data centers engineered for AI. The proverbial, if it's good enough for NVIDIA, it's good enough for anybody, as an example. But it focused in on the AI space, the cloud space, and the enterprise space, and having that triangulated customer mix was something very, very appealing. So it was my opportunity to be able to take my scale up experience and apply it to a startup ish type of company.
Yeah, and in terms of how, I mean, I think you sort of alluded to it there, but in terms of how you'd characterize the company, you say you've referenced it, some of its abilities, where it is and stuff, but just your thoughts, and also, I mean, if you, as frank as you can, were you aware also areas where you thought you could, bring some improvements and values? Or just, yeah, what would be your assessment of KO, as it were, on day one when you arrive?
Yeah, in some respects, it was a little bit of a best kept secret. I mean, it's a great marketing engine and a team that gets the message out, and they do a wonderful job of engaging with the community. And so when the decision was made to go to Manchester, this is prior to my involvement or arrival, they recognize that you don't just talk to customers that might be interested. It's really important to get to know the academic community, the government environment, the business community, and really engage with them. Clearly it's very popular in the UK now to level up, but there's not a lot of organizations that are genuinely doing the hard work and the heavy lifting to be able to engage with the community, share with them what a 40 megawatt data center in Stockport will do for the greater Manchester community. And so the fact that the organization had Kao Data has it as part of its DNA to understand the value of being a good corporate citizen. It's not just a tagline. It's very much part of the culture. And then being able to, if you will, translate that to do repeat that in places like Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Berlin, Barcelona, Madrid. It's just a natural derivation of an already strong culture and already of a strong, business ethic that is just ripe for copying and pasting. But one thing I recognize is it needed, some focused leadership to be able to make sure that there was a recognition that there were some people skills and actual specific roles that needed to be brought into the organization, because it's not just the customers, although they're their most important part. It's not just your beautiful, equity and lender participants, but you really got to make sure that there's that, people pillar and also that process pillar to make sure that when you are successful, you capture that opportunity. The only thing worse than failure is death by success, as I say to the team. So I've spent a lot of the last 6 months making sure that some of the less glamorous pillars are put in place to be able to just make sure that the business is ready to capture the opportunity that it is creating.
Hey, and in terms of your vision for the company, I don't know if you would have had one sort of before you arrived or since you've been here, you've sort of sat and watched and learned, etc. But and obviously in the previous answer you mentioned about rolling out the model, into other markets. But what you can share again in terms of your vision, what you mentioned digital realty earlier on. I mean, obviously they're huge multinational, blah, blah. Do you think KO can grow as big as that? Where would you like to see KO end up, I suppose, is the question.
It doesn't need to be, nor will it be as big as of a digital realty or an NTT or an Equinix. We're that next generation, although we've been doing it for a decade, to really focus in on the high performance compute workloads, the situations where the cabinets have become extremely heavy, that we've made sure that the floors of the data centers from the very beginning don't need to be reinforced, or you don't have to take apart your cabinets to wheel them in because you've got to work your way across brittle or difficult raised floor. So we really are making sure that every aspect of the design, including the liquid cooling technologies, including just really making sure that you don't use diesel generators anymore. You use vegetable oil because it's just much more friendly from an environmental perspective. So it's a matter of just really saying, all right, it's now time to take these pieces that are discretely available and combine them in a 1+1=3 type of environment, where you bring together the technologies, you bring together the people, you bring together the customers that you really need these high density, very, very complex workloads that must be engineered from the beginning to be able to support them. And then, of course, instead of just doing that in Harlow or just doing that in Manchester, because you spend a lot of time building these relationships with these customers, it's time to take the show on the road, because they want you to be increasingly relevant, or to avoid becoming irrelevant. You need to cast a wider net. That doesn't mean you need to be in 30 countries. You don't need to be in 50 countries, but you need to be in the major GDP countries in Europe to really make sure that you get that sweet spot of availability, choice, and also just solving for multiple locations. I remember there was a major hyperscaler that had over 180 colo providers, and I remember distinctly when they said, we do not need a 181st one. And so what you need to do is make sure that you're one of those solving for unique business problems and or unique technology problems, or ideally both. And then not only do you have a seat at the table, but you're also leading with commercial insight in terms of ways to crack the nut in Amsterdam, where there might have been a moratorium, provide additional capacity in Germany, where there's a saturation currently in Frankfurt, and also help out. The industry talks a lot about generative AI being supported out of the Nordics, and that's a great location to do so because of the availability of green power. But the market does want alternatives, and so there's the Iberian Peninsula is appearing to be quite the location to be able to support generative AI workloads, because of its proximity in Europe, but also it's, relatively speaking, low cost of power compared to places like France or Germany.
And in terms of the application focus, the way you're going to position, as you say, it's got a great reputation in the high performance compute space. Is that where you think and clearly with AI exploding, you're right, you're in the right place at the right time. So is that going to keep you busy enough, or will you look at other sort of applications as well as part of the expansion, or is it just more or less to take AI ready data centers across to mainland Europe?
It's we call it the ACE customer segmentation or ACE approach, which is AI for A, cloud, not just hyperscaler, but there are a lot of next tier platforms that are also requiring significantly strong data center solutions. And then the E in ACE is enterprise. And we're finding that we've already done that, where we've actually gone to a bank and said, "You're in the banking business, you're not in the data center business. We'll buy the data center off of you." Most talented banks are very good at buying larger data centers than they require, because no one gets in trouble for buying too big of a data center. Where you run into a problem is if your data center is too small. And so what's happened with movement of workloads to the cloud, there are a lot of banks now that have significant square footage in their data centers that they don't really need. And so what we can do is have it be a win-win proposition, where we buy the data center off of them, we size it to exactly what they require, and then of course they lease it from us. But that excess space and potentially the energy or electricity associated with that excess space can be resold to another customer. And if those banks' data centers are in an existing availability zone, that is a wonderful outcome, because we're able to allocate that power to other customers that need it, as opposed to being stranded space in an availability zone. So instead of that just being a wacky proposition, that's actually something that Kao Data has done extremely well. And so we're going to continue to follow through and replicate AI type of customers. And we're talking to a GPU as a service company that needs to deploy significant capacity at pace. And also, the cloud providers, we're continuing to, not just have one house account, but multiple cloud providers where there's requirements, but not at the expense of our enterprise relationship. So A, C, and E, those three customer segments, the AI, the cloud, the enterprise, are our sweet spot. We have repeated success in each of those segments, and we're going to continue to do that. Now, whether that's going to be the first, whether it's the AI, cloud, or enterprise is the first customer in the market, it almost doesn't matter. We want to make sure that the platform has that capability to support those three types of customers, regardless of the 7 dots or 4 countries that we've declared as our future.
And I'm also wondering, is sustainability, do you think that's another thing that is a bit of a differentiator in the market? So when people are evaluating different offerings, they will look increasingly at the green credentials, if you like, of a company like yourself before they make a decision, or is that not that important yet?
It's super important. It's critical, but it's so critical and so important now. And that, again, that's why we took approach to reduce emissions by 90% in the generator space by having to run on vegetable oil versus on old, smelly old diesel fuel, as just an example. But at the risk of sounding slightly controversial, it's becoming increasingly table stakes or hygiene. It's hard to really differentiate in that respect, because it's almost a moral certitude that you have to be able to be on the path by 2030 at the latest, if not, any and all new initiatives being 100% green or renewable now. And so it's one where every single day we think about that. Every day we think about health and safety, but it's not really a differentiator. The biggest differentiator now is being able to deliver in a timely manner, highly dense data center solutions at scale. Fortunately, even before I came along, the team had planted the seeds and gotten in the front of the queue for large amounts of power in some very unique locations. And it's just a matter of following through on that. So that is much more, time to market, being able to, support these very dense workloads, and being able to, deliver it at speed, and of course maintain, your quality and deliver on time. Is the differentiators that we are proud of and are consistently delivering. Being able to say green credentials is starting to be to just have that be the single differentiator is quote unquote not enough.
Okay, and I mean, just widening out the discussion a little bit, sort of for the industry, just sticking with sustainability, you're suggesting there that most organisations, if not all, are making good progress. Do you think the industry is moving forwards at the right sort of pace with the sustainability? You mentioned the 2030. I think a lot of people are committed to net zero by 2030. Although obviously 2050 is the very end goal, shall we say?
Yes, yes. If the planet is not spontaneously combusting by
Yes.
2050, um, I would say that the industry is making good progress as a whole. A few years ago we did have a quote unquote bad reputation, but I think what governments and local communities are realizing that these phones, which deliver very important applications, are running. The applications are housed in Kao data centers. They're housed in an Equinix data center, and therefore we just need to do a better job of educating the communities at large of the value we bring. And some of the applications in our data center are actually with these artificial intelligence workloads are actually solving for cancer. They're solving for modeling global warming and figure out ways to be able to combat that. So having these applications that are simulating drug trials and or getting the next vaccine out the door as we did during the pandemic. Those, as long as we are engaged with the community in explaining what we do, yes, you have to show your green credentials and your path if you're not already green, and you demonstrate that you do not sacrifice the green credentials by saying, hey, we can get cheaper brown power. You always maintain that that moral certitude, but it's a portfolio of capabilities. Which is really, really important that you need to articulate. One of the projects we're working on is in not just doing a heat exchange in a market, but actually saying, hey, if we put this power substation in this actual location, not only can we run a data center that solves cancer or provides the next generation of applications, but that power can be used to allow a local community to build homes and run those homes. And as long as you're taking that holistic approach to be able to solve for your customers, solve for the community, and obviously you're solving for your shareholders as well. But I mean that's we're in the business of growing the business and pleasing the constituents that are all part of the ecosystem. But as long as you have a joined up story and you're consistent in your delivery, you earn the right to be able to replicate that in not only in new cities but also in new neighborhoods in existing cities, because that's the dynamic that's occurring now is the
Yeah.
fact that it's not just the availability zones that exist today. It's about moving to new locations to be able to spread some of the economic love. I referred to it earlier with our 350 million pound investment in Manchester, but we're taking a similar approach. There's a saturated market in West London in the Slough corridor. And so we're going to innovate and make sure that we help lead the industry to be able to bolster East London as an appropriate alternative availability zone and place to be able to place these artificial intelligence applications.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to come on. You touched on location, and in many different ways. You mentioned the Nordics, where obviously there are sort of cheap availability of renewables, if the
Sure.
temperature is better, these sort of second tier markets, if that's what we call them, etc. I guess the question is, how important or how nuanced do you think the industry is going to become when it, once upon a time it was FLAP or FLAP D markets, and if you weren't there, you could kind of, shut up and go home. Now it's getting more sort of granular. Just your thoughts as to how far that location will matter to people, when building data centers and when customers do or don't come to them, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're still going to see the FLAP D be critical markets. Fortunately, what we're doing and Kao Data is spending a lot of time solving for this is infilling in some of those cities in new neighborhoods where the traditional availability zones, and therefore the traditional network routes are not as important when you're solving for AI. It still needs to be within a reasonable tolerance distance, but what we're doing, it gives us an opportunity, the industry, to be able to go at that old factory that probably did not make sense to be as redone as a data center because it wasn't within the availability zone. It's giving us the collective we, the industry, to be able to go to older sites or maybe less advantaged neighborhoods or communities and be able to fuel inject and bring economic development and a turnaround story and pride, because you're bringing in an artificial intelligence supercomputer or another interesting, fascinating, and you're bringing some jobs and you're bringing a rejuvenation to the neighborhood. And so to translate that back to Flat B, there are going to be neighborhoods or new locations within those cities. East London's a great example. We're going to lead the charge on with Kao Data. But yes, there are going to be what we call next tier markets, just like there's next tier platforms. That new wave, whether they're GPU as a service customers or they're cities like a Barcelona as opposed to being Madrid, or it's Berlin instead of Frankfurt, or even places like Vienna, in due course, because it is still the gateway to Eastern Europe. You don't have to have your compute. You might have some network nodes sitting in Bucharest or in Krakow, but you can still concentrate your compute in additional cities, additional markets. Hence our approach that in every market we go to, we want to at least solve for 2 dots, because customers want that diversity, the resilience, and also it just allows you to move at pace and frankly be a little bit more operationally efficient as well.
And in terms of the expansion for yourselves and then the industry more generally, the skills problem seems to rear its head. The suggestion that there's quite a lot of, shall we say, maturer folks in the industry that are potentially heading towards retirement and then maybe not being replaced as quickly as is required, or whether it's actually running the data centers or the construction, just the whole supply chain. Just thoughts as to, what you see at KO. Is it a big issue or is it not as bad as people make out? Just where you see it.
It's binary. It's either absolutely impossible in certain markets or certain situations to just attract the talent, because we have been very insular, and closed user groups by definition do entropy. Proxy for that was, in some respects, the telecommunication industry. It got a little bit, long in the tooth in terms of it being a bunch of old white guys. I can say that because I am an old white guy. But I share that because the reality is we do need to, actively bring aboard, engineering talent and folks that have not, traditionally been tapped on the shoulder, because we always need someone that can just plug and play. We don't have time. The perception is we don't have time to develop people. Kao Data has taken a very unique approach. I mean, we hosted dozens of students to inspire them to, think about the data center industry as an option, and that's part of our whole culture and our whole, diversity, inclusion, and belonging is to, divert these people from potentially going into something that was maybe a little bit more fun and sexy to something that is vital. It's right up there with hospitals and airports in terms of infrastructure. And because of AI, it's actually fun again. And so we want to be able to continue to promote that and encourage people to join us on the journey. But also, what you need to do is you need to create a culture to where you're winning. And one of the reasons that we're excited at Kao Data is, instead of us just being the master of one city, by virtue of the fact that we are expanding and growing, we're almost a lighthouse or a beacon out there to attract talent. And I'll be very candid. There's a lot of people that I had the honor and pleasure of working with at places like Interaction. There's there are some superstars, and a lot of them have said, "Hey, that was pretty magical. We'd like to do aspects of that again." They've all grown up, and they all want, instead of being managers or directors, they want to be VPs and SVPs. But hey, we need that talent. And so you create a safe environment, you create a fun environment, you create a growing organization, and your competition for human capital is right up there with bringing in equity or debt to support that from a financing perspective. But it's all about creating a culture and environment where people feel truly welcomed, and that they're going to be challenged. That's one of the things almost every single day. I'm providing an opportunity for someone to grow personally and professionally, and that's just as important as having those relationships with the local universities and encouraging that. It's creating a culture of performance. People like to win, and when you win, you attract. Mass attracts mass.
And I'm just wondering, are there any other topics that are of importance either to yourselves or the industry at large? For example, I mean, I think you've already referenced to a certain extent, but the industry seems to be permanently on the back foot, almost apologizing for its existence, as opposed to maybe being on the front foot, as you say. There isn't, there's probably hardly any human activities these days that don't involve, a device that is ultimately relying on a data center, the power, as you say, of bringing data centers into communities, etc. Yeah, just your thoughts as to, I don't know, any other issues that the industry is wrestling with or on the horizon.
Well, I'm glad you framed it that way. I don't think we're no longer purely on the back foot. Are we leaning forward on the front foot? We're probably, it's a journey. I like the progress. We still need to continue to, be even more articulate of the value that we're bringing to society and helping, move society forward. I think the only thing that, I mean, we could talk something, the tactical thing about how quickly we're all going to move to chilled water loops and direct to chip, liquid cooling and all that, and that will happen in due course. And you need to make sure that you've got your team focused on that, but not over rotating and going too far, too fast with the new technology. I think the dominant theme right now in this industry is timely access to power. And so almost every decision we're making is, if because we've planted these seeds or we're in the front of the queue for power in certain locations, if there's a 6 or a 7 at the end of the year that we're going to be able to deliver service, we'll have the community's attention, lots of customers' attention. And if it's got a 7 or an 8 at the end of the year, you're still going to have some attention, and maybe even a 9. But if all you're bringing to the table is a data center solution that's going to be in 2030 or 2031, that's quote unquote too late, because this AI workloads and demand is happening now. It used to be a situation where it would happen in my home country in the States, and then 6 months, 18 months, or 24 months, it's coming over the pond, later. With the fact that almost, there's genuinely very little space and power available in the United States coming online in a data center capacity in 2025. It's almost all been hoovered up by either the hyperscalers or the AI players. It's now happening in parallel in Europe, and for that matter, even Asia Pacific. So it's a race to be able to provide quality power at and obviously space in a timely manner on a distributed basis. So it doesn't all have to be, we're repeating ourselves here, but it's so important to understand it doesn't have to be in Frankfurt. It doesn't have to be in London. The market is recognizing the value of distributing it. So if you've got a 30 or 40 megawatt opportunity to solve in 26 or 2027, you can be sitting down now and having strategic portfolio conversations with the customers and being able to solve tomorrow's business problem today. But it's all about timeliness and also a track record of delivering. I mean, we have a cloud provider that said we've just never had anybody deliver this type of solution at this scale on time, and that's quite the endorsement to be able to have a hyperscaler say that to you. And it's all about execution. So it is about time. That is the single most important variable that we as an industry, and we like to think at Kao Data, we're solving for.
And just quickly on the power front, are you optimistic that there is enough, as whether it's going to slightly different locations and uncovering power there, or just more generally? I mean, people seem to suggest that the power infrastructure in, I guess, most European countries is probably due some kind of an upgrade or refresh. Do you worry again that perhaps that's not happening as quickly as it needs, or do you think the data center industry can be part of the solution, i.e., helping develop these new resources in time? What thoughts on that, I suppose?
I do believe that if the entire industry, including our customer community, recognizes that it needs to be distributed, it's not going to all be in the traditional locations. A combination of new neighborhoods in existing markets and these next tier cities, I think we're going to be able to solve for that, because there is an element where especially some newer players that are saying, "Hey, we're going to go build a 200 megawatt data center in Berlin." I'm just a brand new player, or even Warsaw. Just I'm making the reality is if there are four private equity backed or venture capital backed or creative you know uh, investors that are trying to get in, there is going to be some situations where four organizations are seeking 200 megawatts, and the reality is, not all four of those are going to achieve that. So there is a little bit of there's a slight inflation on the demand, sorry, the supply side of the curve. And that'll probably sort itself out. But I think the way the industry solves for it is to be able to make sure that you prioritize the markets and embrace a distributed compute environment. Then I think there's going to be quote unquote enough power. There still needs to be concerted efforts for the grids and the national grids of countries to have a strategic plan to be able to increase the volumes and increase the capability for distributing that power. But I think the data center industry is doing a pretty darn good job of saying, hey, instead of having to ask for these distribution networks to be bolstered, what they basically are doing is saying, all right, let's just pick up our data centers and move them closer to the power. That's the way you solve for timeliness of delivery of power is build data centers near the power as opposed to expecting national infrastructure to come to you.
Okay, and I suspect I might be able to guess the answer to this one, but the sort of summary question is, do you find the industry sort of overwhelmingly sort of positive and exciting to be involved with, or are there aspects of it that do, whether they keep you awake at night or at least give you, the odd sort of stressful situation, or do you just see it's an exciting industry to be involved with mainly upside and not much downside?
It's a spectrum. It boils down to the personalities of some of these companies that are part of the ecosystem. There's some that are got a kick in the step because they recognize the need and invested in understanding data centers engineered for AI as we've done, as opposed to getting caught on the back foot. It's a full, but from the overall temperature of the industry, I think I picked up really positive vibes at ITW when I was in Washington a couple weeks ago. Even PTC in Hawaii was extremely positive in terms of where things are going, because there are some really creative investors that are highly participatory in helping solve for data centers now that cost more close to billions of dollars, pounds, or euros as opposed to millions, and therefore one of the things the reason it's exciting is because it takes a village to deliver 100 megawatt or 200 megawatt campus, and that's a situation where yes, you'll have your primary investors, Infratel and Legal & General are highly supportive of Kao Data's business plan. We call it a bold business plan, and we've got a great lender with Deutsche Bank that's providing us the debt to be able to move forward. But some of these projects are so big that it will require and bringing in other financial investors to work on bringing and financing maybe the propco, while Kao Data focuses in on delivering the operating company. And there's some magical formulas that can in financing mixes that, if done right, not only allow you to be able to participate in these additional markets, but be able to get there faster, because it's all boils down to time. And so if you line your financing partners up as much as you're lining up your customers, and you're lining up your power certificates and your programs and plans to build data centers, some magical things can happen. And that's what we're not just talking about at Kao Data. Fortunately, we're executing on that, because some of these seeds in terms of getting in the front of the queue were done upwards of 5 years ago, and now what we're doing is harvesting some really hard work, and it requires some talent and a little bit of luck, but by virtue of the fact that instead of us just trying to do it in one location, with our investors and supporting us to do it in 7, we think we've got a sweet spot in terms of solving for these important workloads like AI that are solving tomorrow's problems today.
Okay, I mean, it's been brilliant to chat, and we covered a lot of ground, some really great insights into what's going on both at K and the industry more generally. But Doug, really appreciate your time. Thank you very
No,
much.
thank you. It was a real pleasure. I always enjoy the conversation.
Thanks again.
Bye for now.